Guys, this is our last little session before we go for our break. So for those of you who've been here before, we have a tradition for a couch conversation hosted by our TV star, Michael. So I'm going to hand over now to Michael for our very first couch session with his guests, and I will be coming back to close us out before the parallel session. So a round of applause for Michael's couch sessions.
Thank you, Caroline. So with me here to discuss the principles of inclusive education, and that is going to be the topic of the next 45 minutes, is Nafisa Baboo, the Director of Inclusive Education, Light for the World, based in Cape Town, South Africa, who is the head of Light for the World when it comes to advocacy and a focus on financing. Somehow got it right somehow. But you.
Yes. Welcome. Thank you for everyone. I'm really happy to be here. So I work for Light for the World and I provide technical support to all our programs in low-income countries, and I'm responsible for the global advocacy, and we have a particular interest in financing, closing the gap between policy and policy implementation.
Thank you, Nafisa. To my right is Artemi Sakellariadis, who is the director at the Center for Studies on Inclusive Education from the University of Bristol, UK. Artemi has 30 years experience in working in the field of inclusive education. Anything you want to add, right?
I'll just clarify, if I may, that I have an honorary research associate position at Bristol University, but CSIE is an NGO, it's a not-for-profit organisation. So CSIE has been around since 1982. I joined it in 2007. So I've worked in special schools for many years, but for the past 20 plus years I've focused all of my time and my energy in promoting inclusive education.
Thanks, Artemi. And to my right, third person on the panel is Brandstaetter, who is the General Secretary of Lebenshilfe Austria, Lebenshilfe being the Austrian branch or department or whatever on the inclusion movement. Albert, anything you want to add right away?
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. Lebenshilfe is one of the strongest organizations, TPOs, advocating for inclusive education, for inclusive labor markets, for inclusive houses. So for us, inclusive education is one of the key issues for a self-determined life with full participation in society.
Thank you. So the next some 35 or 40 minutes we will spend on leveling the playing field of inclusive education. We want to get three things done. First, find out what the principles are that everyone agrees on when it comes to inclusive education, meaning, let us say almost everyone, every expert agrees, every scholar that accepts the CRPD, accepts the SDGs, accepts the other major international conventions. So what is the ground that we are standing on? Second, also find out where the differences are and where not everyone agrees. So let me start by getting the very basics out of the way. We agree that this is about having rights and not about welfare or charitable work. We agree that we talk about quality education, we talk about equality and equal opportunities for all. And we also agree that these goals and others, like inclusion in the regular schools, like the inclusion in the labor market or independent living, can only be achieved by inclusion in the regular school system. And we agree that we are talking about person-centered approaches, about adapted and additional learning materials. We talk about reasonable accommodation of the classroom. We talk about teacher training, adapted curricula, use of technology that creates the inclusion, this equality, this accessibility in the school and the classroom that we all wish for. I tested that in the preparation, so everyone on the panel agrees, and still everybody is nodding. I can now move on to the next point, to Nafisa. Nafisa, you have enormous background with many years in the field of working towards inclusive education systems, also in low-income countries, and you have done a lot of work, especially on learners who are blind. What is it that you want to add about the general understanding what inclusive education is?
Thank you, Michael. What I really want us to remember, and I think here we all agree that inclusive education and quality education will end exclusion. And it's also a way of ending the learning crisis. Because we know that when we train teachers in teaching strategies such as play-based learning or designing lessons that are interactive, fun, where you use graphics, role-playing, demonstration. It's not just interesting and enticing for students to engage and learn, because all people learn differently, but it also makes a lesson accessible for a child who is blind, who is deaf, and I think that is what we all know. I think we feel like we're inclusive education practitioners, we feel like we have the magic bullet, the answer to solving the learning crisis, and people must just hear us, because it's not just about disability. It's so much more. There's so many positive things that it can bring to create quality education and an inclusive society.
Okay, thank you, Nafisa. Albert, as the head of the Austrian Inclusion Network, your focus is learners with intellectual disabilities. What do you want to add here? Still, we want to focus on what the common ground is, what everyone agrees on.
I think the common ground, at least at this panel, is that people with intellectual disabilities have and should have equal rights with all other pupils. But it's easily said, and reality is different. At least in Austria, we have still quite many special education units, special education schools, and here we have still not yet a common understanding in society. Some in the teachers' circle say we still need special education units because we don't have full accessibility in regular schools. Also, parents say we don't have full choice, because if you have, on the one hand, a regular school which is not completely accessible, where not all the teachers are educated in inclusive education, and on the other hand, you have schools with very small classes with 8 or 10 pupils, with 2 teachers, with lots of therapeutical possibilities, maybe even with a swimming pool, with highly educated teachers, and full-day education, not only half-day education, then the choice for parents is easy, and they won't blame them. So here we have to say, we have as a vision, I think in Austria we have already the vision, every person with disabilities should have the same possibilities in schools. But the way to that is difficult and will be quite a long way.
Okay. Applause. Also to get this back on this first round, we all agree, including you and the whole inclusion movement, inclusive education means no exception to the rule, especially not for children with intellectual disabilities. Yeah. And there's the problem how we're getting there, and we're coming to this point later in the discussion. So Artemi, what do you want to add from your perspective? You have a long-term experience also in working directly in the field. What do you want to add?
I think I'll absolutely echo all means all. There's, we can't say that enough. But the point I wanted to make at this point in time actually has been made by our previous keynote speaker, and that was that we need to be clear about where we are. And I would add that we need to know how we've got here. So I would encourage everybody to just take a look back historically and remember that the historical perspective tells us that when school for all children came up as a notion in Western Europe at the end of the 19th century, that was a time where social values were very, very different. And at that time, disabled people were thought to have no place in society or as institutions. So schools sprang up as institutions catering for average children, non-disabled children. And in the years that followed, separate special schools sprung up out of charitable initiative or you know, disabled people's initiatives. So we established a parallel system of education with mainstream for some and separate special schools for others, not because anybody ever sat around a table and planned this and thought this is a good way to organize education. It just evolved in this way. So right now we have this system. We know that, as you say, what we all agree on is honoring the rights of every child to a good education, and we're not quite sure that we agree on where that should be. And if at some point we understand that some of the mainstream schools are not well prepared, as you say, Albert, to be providing for all children, then we have a choice of what do we do in response to that. Do we say, oh, well, that's okay, some people can go somewhere else? Or do we say, well, here is a clear cause for transforming mainstream education so that it can respond to the needs of every child?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Nafisa.
You know, what I find very interesting is what people now regard as premier education, right? If you're in private education, send your child to a Montessori school or a Waldorf school. These are the learning philosophy around these education systems, which are very child-centered, was developed by actually studying children with intellectual disability and how they learn. And then it's embedded in, and the education system was designed around that approach. And this is actually an approach that appeals to all students, right? Because it's so much more interactive, child-centered. So we really want to look, I think what we really, all of us are inclusion experts, feel that we really need to bring that quality aspect together with inclusive education, because it's not just about a minority or a small group of people and their inclusion, it's a way of educating all children.
Thank you, Nafisa. So I think we somehow laid the groundwork now, so there is basically an agreement that inclusive education basically has no exception here. This is the agreement here in the panel. On the other hand, there are some discussions going on, we know that, and I would like to address one of those discussions directly and I'd like to get your opinion on this. So if I quote, for example, the general comments on inclusive education, also the general comments on the CRPT when it comes to education, and Article 25 reads, many state parties are failing to make appropriate provision for persons with disabilities, in particular persons on the autism spectrum, those with communication impairments and those with sensory disabilities. And it also mentions students who are blind, deaf or deaf-blind must be provided with education delivered in the most appropriate languages and modes and means of communications for the individual and in environments which maximize personal, academic and social development, both within and outside formal school settings. So could I phrase this differently and say, since realistically it will never happen that enough teachers in regular schools are able to teach in Braille or in sign language, and children will never really learn those languages in school, there's a need for additional special training, even outside formal school settings. Is that the right interpretation? Is there an agreement on that? Is there this need for outside training, additional training? And related to that, I would like to ask a second question. If I look at the human rights perspective, the rights of citizens, the rights of even children, it's about enabling, about capabilities, about the right to choose. Does that mean that children or their parents have a right to exclude their children from regular schools and stick to special schools, at least partly if they want to? Is there a right to opt out? Who wants to go first? Artemi?
I'll go first, thank you. We have to remember that children's rights are children's rights. So there is a misconception that parents have a right to, of course, parents, while the child is young and decisions are being made about their education, parents are the best advocates of what is right for the child. But we mustn't forget that it's the child's rights that we're talking about. We also mustn't forget, I was reading a chapter of a book recently that details CSIE's involvement in writing Article 24, and it was a fascinating read to see how Article 24 came to be what it is. And I understand that for many of the ad hoc committee sessions, there were a lot of differences of opinions or whether separate special schools should be put forward as an alternative or not. And in the end, the consensus was that they should not, that inclusive education should be put forward as the only goal. So I think we need to remember that. And of course, a few years later came General Comment number 4 confirming what Article 24 means by inclusive education. So I am personally in no doubt what the intention should be for all of us, and anybody signing up to Article 24 has signed up to that. And I'll let my other fellow speakers speak, and there's a lot more I could say, but I don't want to hold the floor.
Let's come back to that then. Nafisa, you want to go next?
So, you know, what we really have to remember is what is the end goal of education, right? It's to make sure that we have adults who can contribute to society, that feel part of society, belong, that they, and there is no separate societies for blind people, deaf people. We all go to the same shops, that we have, we'll work in the same offices, obviously, in the future. That's the dream. We want to create an inclusive society with children who learn together, and play together, learn to work together, right? So I think it's really important that we bear in mind what the end goal is. And yes, of course, children need support. And the support shouldn't be a place, but people or experts can come to a school and provide that support. And I think that's what we always need to bear in mind. We want to bring in the support, not just to the child, but to the teacher, to the family, and that is what is necessary. I think that the decisions around whether you put a child in a special school comes out of fear often from a parent, that their child will be bullied, not accepted. And that is actually the reason why they choose these schools, or they feel this is where the specialists are. But if we create schools or start developing child-friendly schools that are where there's no bullying, where there's a culture of acceptance, good teaching practices and all of that, and the support comes in, I think parents would feel more at ease about sending their child to a regular school. And in our projects in Ethiopia, we have, for example, RSDA, one of our partners, have children with who are deaf in regular schools, in regular classrooms. Also have teachers who are deaf teaching diverse classrooms of children who are hearing and deaf, and things are going well there. And all the children are interested in learning sign language. There's lots of acceptance and joy in the classroom. It is possible, and I think that we also need to show parents what is possible and help them to advocate for that, so that schools can transform, regular schools can transform.
Would I summarize this? Would I summarize this correctly? What you're saying is that as long as it's in a regular school system, in a regular classroom, additional support can be given and should be given, but it should not be a separate setting. That's the distinction line. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Support is not a place, it's a person. Support is not a place, it's a person with expertise.
Albert?
Yeah. I can immediately join you, because I think that's our vision too, that to overcome the dilemma of parents to choose whether to go to the regular system or a special education system. It's just to create one system where children or young adults will go and will attend a good inclusive education setting. But of course, here we have to take serious the fears of parents. As you said, there are real fears and real experiences of bullying, of exclusion, of non-take-up quotes, of pupils with disabilities. And so we need to create, and I think we will succeed in creating a good system with very good assistance, not only by teachers, but also by social workers or assistants in the schools, because not everything has to be done by teachers. But we will have a good system where teachers have at least the basic training on inclusive education. And we have enough teachers with special education training which can support their colleagues. And we will have enough financial resources for the schools which we then have to reallocate. So when we create such a system, parents will be able to choose willingly or to say, yes, I can trust the school, I can trust adult education, or I can trust university that my child, my young son and my young daughter can attend these education possibilities. This will be quite some time to reach, but I think at least we in Austria, we have one of the most expensive educational systems in the world, and it would be a very bad sign if we don't create a really inclusive system.
Artemi.
If I may add, you know, the examples that you mentioned, there were blind children or you know, children who need a medium of language, there were either written language or spoken language for deaf children. And we have become accustomed, there's a culture of accepting that it's okay to send some children to a separate school. And we wouldn't do that for anybody else. You know, we've closed down all of our segregated provision for black children, and for, you know, we wouldn't do it for anybody else. So, you know, we have economic migrants coming, moving to our countries, and children who don't speak the native language yet are supported through interpreters to access the curriculum. So I think that's exactly what we should be doing for everybody else. What I missed out before was to flag up, thank you, what I missed out was to flag up that choice happens in a context. So if we really want to give parents a real choice of where their children will go to school, we really have to develop enough transform mainstream provision so that every local school can respond to the needs of any learner. Without that, it's a hollow promise. I like to give the example. It's just words. I give everybody in here a choice of whether they want to sit on a blue or a red chair. No, that's no choice. That's the quote-unquote choice that some parents are having. So if we are talking about choice, it really has to be having every option on the table well developed and giving parents a real choice of where they want their child to go to school.
I really loved what Albert said about who we're all responsible to promote inclusion, about experts and teachers. I think what we always forget is that children are also offer support to other children. And I think that there are such a great untapped resource when we look at, people say, oh, these classrooms are so big, you know, there's so many children. I'm like, there's so many helpers. There's so many people who can support one another. And we see in lots of our Light for the World programs, there are so many, we see great examples of children actually leading the way. They are so much more accepting of diversity and welcoming to children who are said to be different. And I think that we should learn from children, because if we don't give children the choice, they will choose. If we give children the choice who have disabilities, they would choose to be with their peers who are, when they see is other children without disabilities.
I completely agree. I think this capability approach is one of the biggest resources we have, and we still didn't really explore its possibilities. So, for example, also when the first question you asked about the different languages we have in schools or should have in schools, it may be that it's at the present state it's necessary to have also trainings out of schools to get these languages. But at least in Austria, sign language is an acknowledged language. So why not train it in school from the very beginning for all pupils? And also other ways of communication that may be easy to read, text or braille and so on. This could be taught together with, among the peers, with teachers and so on and so on. I think this could enrich our educational system much more than we say, oh, it's a problem because it's a costly and so on and so on, all these boring debates.
Thank you, Michael. Just one more thing I'd like to add. And again, we need to be aware of where we are, what our culture is saying to us right now. And we've got accustomed to accepting what I think is actually discriminatory. The intention has always been to give additional support to children who need it. And nobody could argue against that, I don't think. It's a kind of moral question. But what we've ended up doing is giving alternative support, not additional, alternative. So children are missing out on something on the grounds that they need the expert support. There's nothing that happens in a special school that cannot happen in an ordinary school. And I sometimes make the analogy that this is like placing a child in hospital on the grounds that they need the medical intervention and not letting friends and family to visit, saying, you know, that's where they need to be. They don't need to be separate from children. Disabled children don't need to be away from their brothers and sisters and friends and potential friends from the local community. We're just taking something away in order to give something that could be delivered anywhere, like Nafisa says.
Okay, Nafisa, two sentences.
Sorry, we're all talkers here. Sorry about that. But you know what I also think, and we have Maysoon Saeed, it's one of the comedians, she's a fantastic comedian and her Abilities Award winner. She was saying how at her school and what her father encouraged her to do, because she has cerebral palsy and they didn't have money for fancy therapies, is to basically enroll her in tap dancing and singing and drama. And I also, those are the things, I actually played tennis even though it was really hard for me to see. I mean, those, because my parents couldn't afford the fancy vision therapy, occupational therapy. So there are things in our current curriculum, if it was not just focused on maths and literacy, if it looked at arts as well, that are therapeutic and inadvertently will help a child to develop skills that were said to be maybe their functional skills, a child with a specific disability, to improve their visual perceptual or their fine motor skills. There are things that are already in an arts curriculum that can help them to improve those skills. Painting, you know, art, there's so many things that can be done.
Thank you. So to a very brief in-between wrap-up, so what I got out of this discussion is when we look about the capability approach, the enabling approach, giving people, parents, children a real option, a real choice, then we're moving out of this discussion in total, and then you have real choice between different schools, but not about segregation or not segregation, or special or not special. So this is the way to move forward, creating real choices. And the other thing is, also this nothing about us without us also applying to the children themselves, so they should also have a role, and we're losing a lot if we don't do that, because so many things could be there and is of value and impact to the whole class that we lose. Moving now to the third part of this discussion, it was mentioned already several times. When we talk about inclusive education, this is not a greenfield operation. We don't start from scratch. In every country of the world, I think we can really say in every country, there is an established school system, an established school system mostly consisting of mainstream schools and special schools. So we're not starting from somewhere. We have to change an existing system. On the other hand, in many countries, or in most countries, there is a budget there for education. Even in the poorest or low-income countries, they have a budget. So that's different to other aspects of the challenges that people with disabilities normally face. So what would be your suggestion to move from this current situation with the mainstream and segregated systems at the same time to the common goal that we all share? Who wants to go first?
I think most important is first to break down the barriers in our brains, so that when we say all means all, then it really means all. Also those students and young people with very high and complex needs. This is very important, because very often we hear in discussions, but there will be always a little rest of those who can't be included into our school system. I say no. Our vision must be everybody can use and can attend our educational system. That's the change of brains, and also that we focus on personalized careers in education, focus on person-centered trainings, person-centered curricula and examination settings, which can do quite a lot. Secondly, I think this means also to invest very much into the training of teachers and training of trainers, to know about inclusive education, to know about also about special education for special assistance situations. So we have teachers, and next we will have to create a very good assistance system within the regular schools. Of course, nowadays parents very often have the fear, if I send my child into a regular school, there will not be enough assistance, there will not be enough service done for my child. Here we have to invest, and I think this is possible. And of course, we have also to say, no longer two systems, but the existing special education units in our system, they open themselves, become regular systems and best practice examples, encouraging other schools to open, and so that vice versa education among the schools is possible, and so the system will change slowly and slowly. And I think the other aspects my two colleagues will say.
Okay, I'll go next. Some of what I want to say has already been said, so I absolutely echo what you say about preparing the workforce. So we need to have the teachers and the learning support assistants that can do this. We actually need we need a culture shift, and we need to think how we're going to bring that culture shift about. I think each and every one of us needs to have as many conversations as we can. I think there is no dichotomy of, is it special education or is it mainstream education that is better? That's a false dichotomy. Mm-hmm. I think the two positions are not incompatible. It's an irony that huge, big, powerful lobbies put pressure on governments to maintain the status quo or to change the status quo, and both lobbies use the needs of the children. Do that in the name of what's best for the children. So I think that's not incompatible positions. I think that those of us who argue for inclusive education do so in the name of children's rights, and those who argue for special provision make that as a kind of partial reflection of existing provision. This is, if existing mainstream schools cannot adequately support my child, then I want my child to go somewhere else. That's a reflection on current practice. It's not that anybody says that special schools are better in principle. I don't think anybody has ever said that. So I think in all of what we do, we need to ask ourselves, how can we include this person? How can we make this happen? Rather than, can we? And find that no might be an answer. Mm-hmm.
But one additional question, where would you start to change it? Of course, it's the change of mindsets and the change of working on the ground, but if you look at the legal system, at funding systems, where would you start?
I would do two things, because I think change happens top down. So I would go to policymakers and I would really want to make sure that the intention is very clearly stated, but I think change also happens from the bottom up. So I would have personal conversations with anybody. I have conversations with people I meet on the bus. I have conversations everywhere, because that's how, by changing. My experience is that people haven't really grappled with these questions, and once you put forward the children's rights perspective, people agree with me. I'm sure that people will agree with others that put forward the same position. So we just need to go top down and bottom up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really agree also about the top-down, bottom-up approach, because, when world leaders stand up and say, I commit to inclusive education, and show their commitment by financing, that's where we will see a real change in closing the gaps between ideology and policies, and then making it real on the ground. We need financing, and I'm really happy about the World Bank commitment to make all education projects disability inclusive by 2025, and I think that's a great ambition, and we should make sure that any donor who funds education should make all their programs disability inclusive. It must be a criteria to access funding. We always ask in proposals, so how does your project, how is it gender sensitive or sensitive to the environment, right? When people apply for funding, we should ask, and how will your project in education support children with disabilities? So when there's a project looking at improving maths or mathematics or literacy, they have to be disability inclusive. And they have to report on it, and I think that is really important, because then we will see better traction in this area and progress. And governments in their education sector plans should also make sure that the disability is mainstreamed in all aspects of the education sector plan. When they look at teacher training, when they look at how they are developing their workforce and building it up. And I think those are all very important. I think what we have a really good opportunity at the moment with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? There's a more impetus, 10 years to go, so we really need to make things happen. And I see that, you know, there's a lot of emphasis also now on early childhood care and education. And I think in our sector, in early child development, because there's research to show, you know, if you start there, you can mitigate problems earlier, improve learning outcomes. And I tell you, this is even more so for children with disabilities. So we also need to be better about our investment choices. We should invest early with the young children, and that's going to really yield us the best results. So I think we need to look at how we invest and encourage governments, world leaders to take the lead and invest in inclusive education for children with disabilities.
Thanks, Nafisa. We are moving to the end of this session. To the whole panel, anything that you want to say that we have missed out so far that you want to add as your final contribution?
Thank you. I'd like to add something. I'd like to put together two of the comments that you made, Nafisa, because on the one hand, finances are absolutely important. We cannot have inclusion if it's not appropriately funded. On the other hand, you mentioned the importance of having other children, non-disabled children, as an important learning resource. So I want us all to remember that if, you know, in the absence of funding, that doesn't mean that we can't have inclusion. You know, if we don't do anything until we can do everything, we end up doing nothing. And that's, we really need to remember that. And also, what more we can do, I would add, we need to share examples of good practice, like our previous presenter said. We also need to share evidence that inclusion works. And we've had the Alana Institute report for many years. We've recently, since 2018, have the report on how inclusive education actually has a positive impact on social inclusion later in life. You know, all the evidence is there. We need to be sharing it, and we need to help bring around that cultural transformation.
Thank you. Albert? No final famous last words.
No more famous last words. Can we please put on? Yeah, give it up for our couch. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Can we put this mic on? Okay, guys, we are now going to just get some time to stretch those bodies, grab your sandwich. We are going to be leaving this room in a few seconds and starting our parallel sessions. You will go to your various parallel sessions. We will be coming back to this room together at 5 o'clock, where we will have a couch discussion with youth, and we will be having our exhibition descriptions and also a keynote from Betsy Bowman. So before we phase out, this is a message for our friends in Access Israel. Generally, I'll tell you what you do with the break, but we filmed this in Tel Aviv. So they wanted to try and help all of us understand, for those of us who are visually impaired, what it might mean for us to see or communicate within a conference setting. So this is the last out. You go out, get your sandwiches, get into your parallel sessions, and we'll see you back here at 5 o'clock. So roll the film there. Okay, so we're going into break now, and one of the most important things, as we all know about the Zero Conference, the really special thing is about friendship and connection. So I urge you during the break to go out and speak to somebody that you have never spoken to. Make sure that everybody is okay, because together we have a chance of creating a noise that is unstoppable, and to make our Zero family bigger and better. I will see you after the break. Okay, guys, go get some lunch, grab your sandwiches, and we will see you back here. Go into your various sessions, and we'll see you back here at 5 o'clock. Thank you. Make sure you talk to each other, and make sure you include each other. So have fun.